Okay, so everyone, thank you for joining us today. Sorry about we had a little bit of a hiccup in the beginning with things going live. But I just wanted to say thank you, Terry, for joining us today. This is a live interview with Terry Ribera, and I really hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. I'm pretty sure I am, but you never really know. So I wanted to say thank you for joining us today. I did just ask you to start your video up again.
Yeah, so this host is okay. All right, I think we're good.
Awesome. Excellent. And I'm actually going to pin your video, spotlight for everyone, so that this way we're focused on you. You can probably still see me, but no one else is going to be able to on the live stream, which is totally fine. So let's start off with some personal background. Tell us where you're from, what kind of art education do you have? What led you to become a tattoo artist? What drives this with you?
All right, I guess I'll start with, so in case you're wondering, the pronunciation for my last name is Ribera. It's just like Rivera. Yeah, so I grew up in the Bay Area, so just 30 minutes outside San Francisco, in a little suburb called San Carlos. This is just on the peninsula. And my parents moved there. They originally met in Tahiti. My mom is actually Tahitian. She's from Bora Bora. And my father actually used to work for Disney. He's an excellent photographer, did cinematography, did prop design, was good at fabricating things. This was just sort of a random accident, really. Like, he didn't have the intentions to work in the movies at all. It just sort of right skill set and opportunities like landed on his lap. And that's how he ended up meeting my mother and all those things. So, they got pregnant with my brother. They take my half sister along, and they end up moving to the U.S. And very shortly after that, I was born. So as far as a lot of my art background, there hardly isn't anyone in my family that can't create or make art to some degree. My sister could draw a little bit. My brother could draw a little bit. My mother is pretty crafty. She's was a great dancer when she was young. My father can draw actually quite well, even though he does not any longer at this stage in his life. It's just something he lost interest in 40 years ago. My uncle was a very accomplished oil painter. My grandmother could oil paint as well. My aunt was good with pastels. There's just a long line of artists in my family. My brother's kids, both of them can draw. Honestly, if you were born in my family, you can draw. It's just a genetic thing. But for me, it really took, my parents told me, I guess when I was 3, one day I decided I wanted a pen and paper. My mom is excited. She's thinking I'm going to do the alphabet, those little plastic templates where you can, draw the alphabet. And instead I drew a picture, and that was the first time they'd seen me do that. And they're like, wow, the kid just drew immediately. I didn't scribble. I actually made it, a house, and people walk in, and it was actually our family, a pet dog I didn't have. But anyways, so they saw that and they're like, all right, wow, this kid actually can just sort of do this. So let's encourage it. And my parents did. My dad made it a point to buy stacks of just cheap typing paper from the grocery store every couple weeks, and I would just fill it up. And my dad, slowly started bringing anatomy books home, and that was something that was really important to him, as far as just having a good foundation in drawing. He says, if you can learn to draw people, then you can draw everything. And I agree with that. It's something that we're all familiar with, and we know when it's wrong. Even people that don't draw well at all, they can tell when it doesn't look right. You got a wonky eyeball, your spacing is incorrect. Universally, most people have very similar breakdowns, so trying to learn those types of things, like drawing a Loomis or Riley method head, or Bert Hogarth. I had a lot of Bert Hogarth books. But yeah, definitely a lot of the Andrew Loomis stuff, and Bridgman, so those kinds of things that I kind of either were introduced to by my father, or kind of reintroduced to when I was in my 20s, when I was trying to take these things more seriously. I grew up pretty poor. I didn't have the opportunity to go to art school. It was, I just, the way things were at the time, it was very difficult for me to get government loans. My parents, or at least my father at that stage of my life, was just making enough money finally, now that I was moved out of the house, that I didn't qualify for like certain level of financial aid. So that was frustrating. All my best friends are now, they're all going to the Academy of Art in San Francisco. And although in hindsight, looking back at that, I didn't accumulate debt. I'm still doing artwork for a living, as most of my friends are not, excluding one does 3D animation and does quite well with it. So yeah, it was kind of one of those things where art was just, it's always been part of my life. It's always what I saw myself doing. And I'm sure a lot of tattooers on here, things that I'm saying are probably familiar. I think that might be a lot of our stories, ones that sound like mine, the kid that could draw, so yeah, it was a way I could make friends. I was kind of socially awkward. I didn't really know how to introduce myself to people. And it was just one of those things where super easy. All you gotta do is sit down, start drawing pictures. Kids are gonna swarm around me. I'm getting positive feedback. I'm getting to know people's names. They're asking about me. I tell some silly jokes, draw funny pictures of the teacher. And before you know it, I got buddies. It was cool, but mainly, really it was my father. Really, I would look for his advice. That was something I learned right from the beginning, which was, I don't know what I'm doing, but I think I have a knack for it. So just kind of like taking time to hear his criticism, really, and not being like upset by it, or at least maybe the way he shared those criticisms, I didn't find upsetting. It was really just like, oh, he told me a piece that I'm missing. So that means the next time I show him my drawings, I need to meet that goal. And, and eventually, rather than it being him, where I would be seeking that advice from, I would just kind of do it with myself. I be very critical of my own work. Yeah, I thought I was going to grow up to do like fantasy illustration or comic books or something like that. Tattooing honestly wasn't something I thought I was going to do. It just wasn't in my wheelhouse. I didn't have, family members that had tattoos. It's funny, like I grew up in the Bay Area, all, through the 80s, through the 90s, and I guess in the 90s, like the Bay Area, San Francisco particularly, had like basically a tattooing renaissance. So, all this stuff is happening right before, I ended up moving to San Diego. Moved to San Diego in my very early 20s. I was 21. And at that time, I was working for a bunch of small record labels, super into like underground hip hop music and scratch DJing stuff. I own turntables. I'm a little bit of a nerd for that kind of stuff myself, but just that's what I was doing. I was making artwork for this kind of stuff. And, although I liked the music, I wasn't super into that kind of art, but hey, it was a career, at least I thought it was the beginning of a career, being able to, do commercial art and illustration. And that lasted for a little while. I was paying bills barely, like just trying to make it. And San Diego, so lucky to end up here. This, in my opinion, might be the greatest city to tattoo in. There are so many incredible tattooers here. It's kind of ridiculous. It's honestly really hard. If you want to come to San Diego and start tattooing here, and you haven't been here for 10, 15 years already, it can be tough. It's it's a heavy hitter market here. And but when I got here, it wasn't quite that extreme. There's definitely some great people here. It just wasn't so many. I think eventually people kind of kept seeing it here. But yeah, being lucky to come here and learn to tattoo here. Yeah, I started tattooing at Tahiti Felix's Master Tattoo. This is down the gas lamp in San Diego. It's been open since 1949. Super amazing shop, really incredible history. I learned under the two owners, Maurice and Hero Lynch. Those are the sons of Tahiti Felix, and their brother-in-law, Gil Taimana. They were all there. They were running the show, and they introduced me to Denny Bernard, who's another artist that worked there. And Denny pretty much decided that he was going to be the one to teach me. So officially, I was the shop's apprentice, but it became very clear that Denny was going to teach me. So yeah, I would say he as far as the way I think about tattoos, has everything to do with the things that he kind of opened my eyes to. He focused on large scale Japanese tattoos, and he was very, very, very adamant about composition. And I could relate to that because my father was the same. Even though my father kind of abandoned drawing, he was obsessed with photography and the rule of thirds and composition and this type of thing. And it just, when I saw tattooing on a large scale, it did something for me that I didn't see in traditional like drawing, painting, like 2D type art form. It was more something that I would see in a sculpture. That tattoos, because of the surface that we're using, we have to think really three-dimensionally. It's not just about making a cool illustration. It's about thinking about logically, like, how does this play out on someone's body? So yeah, man, I might have gone a little long with that, but anyways.
No, that's totally fine. You brought up Denny. Denny was a huge influence on me as well. In fact, I credit him for giving me what I like to call my first like real like big boy tattoo, that wasn't done by one of the local artists where I live. It was someone that I sought out. I had been following, made the trip out there, and just was in awe of the Japanese stuff that he was doing. So I really credit him for like really opening my eyes to a lot of different things. So it's I think it's amazing and fascinating that, the same person can influence so many different people across the board over the years. And I don't think that they realize the impact that they actually have on different people and different, of different walks of life in different parts of the world.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So speaking of artists and stuff like that you admire, who would you say some of your biggest influences are? Doesn't have to be tattoo artists, can be fine artists, can be, sculptors, photographers, anyone out there that does art. Who would you say your biggest influences would be?
So obviously the first I mentioned my father, because he was the first person to get me used to critique, which is something artists need to get used to. And again, critique if you're asking. I used to do this, and I try to not make it a habit of doing this, but I think because I was very used to that in the beginning part of my career of having this very open critique. I've learned since that not everyone wants to hear your critique, and my critique may not be right, so some of us are doing, different things with a different intention. And I think that's okay. But if you are open to critique, I think that was very valuable. So that's a huge life lesson, and I got it from my father. So of course, him being an artist, that would be my first. But outside of that, and I'm going to start with artists that aren't tattooers, because there's that person that I was before tattooing. So Frank Frazetta, I loved his use of color, texture, how dynamic his paintings were. Alphonse Mucha, that is someone that I kind of rediscovered as a tattoo artist, and I always enjoyed their work, but once I started tattooing, their work meant something different to me. Particularly the commercial work, the illustration, because the way Mucha would break things down into really simple forms, his use of line weight, his use of contrast, and really simple, elegant design, and the way he would use a French curve, the sort of Art Nouveau, S shape that I think a lot of tattooers are used to, especially if you do Japanese or like biomechanical type work. That shape, or those shapes like that, are really lend hand to the human form. It fits perfectly on arms. It fits perfectly on legs. It just makes sense. And to see Mucha's work, I mean, virtually everything that he designed, even though it was for a poster, you could almost take these things and expand them large enough, and you could fit, like, this is a perfect rib to thigh to knee panel, or wow, this would make a great sleeve. You'd hardly have to change anything to make it work, which I don't find in a lot of artwork outside of tattooing. Although I think the rules of painting, like composition and photography, are a little different. They bear some crossover, but tattooing, you're really trying to think about that shape on a person's body. And looking at his artwork, it kind of just did that, and it's not surprising to me that a lot of tattooers can relate to Mucha. For sure. I love sculptures from Bernini. Bouguereau, I think, is an amazing, just incredible oil painter. Definitely one of my favorites. Leindecker, I love Leindecker's stuff. There's just a lot of artists out there that, I could go on,
Fair enough.
But as far as tattooers, probably the first three tattooers that really stood out to me, first being Philip Lou, because Denny was so impacted by Philip Lou, and I think a lot of European tattooers were and are. He's really like the OG, great wave of the 90s tattooers. The next artist that had a big impact on me, I would say, would be Aaron Kane. Again, I think the way he drew biomech, particularly, but not just that. I mean, even work that he didn't do that was that it had this Art Nouveau influence. You could tell he was very influenced by Alphonse Mucha. It's weird because I think a lot of people think of H.R. Geiger when they think of biomechanical. But when you look at what Aaron Kane was doing, or Marcus Pacheco, or Guy Atchison, they kind of went different directions with it, trying to do something that was more useful in the way a tattoo would work. And definitely what Aaron was doing had a lot to do with that. Steve Moore, Canadian tattooer. I think he really makes the most beautiful compositions. I hardly can think of anyone who can compose a better design. Whether or not you like his style, whether or not you like his approach to tattooing, I think just appreciating it for like the thought that goes behind his designs really impressive. And then Rob Costa, love Rob Costa's work. Love Barsube. People might know him as Loose Lips.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's incredible. In more recent years, really became a fan of Emily Rose Murray. Again, super beautiful stuff. And there's a lot of tattooers I like, just even though they don't tattoo in a way that's close to me at all. I love Mike Rubendahl's work. There's a lot of stuff that Ed Hardy, obviously, such an amazing impact on tattooing. Grimy, I think maybe I relate to him a little bit more artistically. But yeah, another just goddamn someone that I saw in the beginning. I was like, I want a fucking tattoo like that. And then obviously Marcus Pacheco. I think all of modern like illustrative tattooing, you can pretty much tie to Marcus. You wouldn't see a lot of the things I think many of us do today if it wasn't for Marcus. That's a long list.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's always good to understand like where some of these influences are coming from. And then, what I always like to do is I'll go through and I'll interview a few people and I'll find out who their influences are and where they really got their drive for it and what really influences their work. And then it's almost like overnight, I start to see those influences in all of the drawings they do, all of the paintings they do. And it's like, oh, okay, I can see now, how this person was inspired by, this piece, or how they were, where did they get this concept to render things in this way from? You can start to see certain similarities and parallels between their influences, their primary influences, and the work that they produce and put out. So to me, it's always fascinating to see like what really drives a person and what really inspires them and who their biggest inspirations are. Because I can tell you just by looking at some of the biomech work that you've done, I can see a very heavy influence from Aaron Kane in that, with a lot of the metallic structures and the tubular forms, how it's, very sharp and very edgy, but how you have these beautiful color contrasts in there that just really bring a lot of shapes to life. So for me, it's like, oh, okay, I see it. I get it. It's just something that I personally like to pick up on and try to understand. But speaking of art, how important, I know you work in a lot of different secondary mediums outside of tattooing. I know you do a lot of oil painting, and you work in a lot of different mediums as well. How important to you is working in a second medium?
I think as far as like having a soulful experience, and being connected to who I am as an artist, it's incredibly important. That's just the reality of tattooing, or at least the reality of tattooing where I'm at in my career. I'm an artist for hire with that, and that's great. I make a living from that. I own a home. I own things. I can buy stuff. I can hopefully retire if I not. And that's pretty cool for a kid that just was like, I don't know, what are you gonna do when you grow up? I draw pictures, hopefully it works. So that's great. But there's the artist that I was and am before tattooing, and this is something that I think is just something for any young artist to think about. I think a lot of us are very used to art being a very private thing. It's something that you do. It's just a way to sort of be in your head. It can be a type of meditation. It can help a person, or at least it does for me. It helps me kind of escape just things in my life, or in some ways I even use it to sort of problem solve things that are going on in my life, because it's such a great way for me to focus, that as things enter my mind, I can kind of take time with those thoughts and feelings, and art has always been that vehicle for me to do that, beyond just the technical aspects of it. The other thing that I really like about making art outside of tattooing is that I can challenge myself to try and do things that I maybe wouldn't do with a client. Things I'm like, I've got these ideas. I don't know what to do with them. I need to practice this, whatever it is. Maybe you want to get really good at filigree, or maybe you really want to get really good at drawing water, or just sort of really just studying shapes. That's something that I didn't, I did a little bit of that before tattooing, but most of my focus with art before tattooing was not so design driven. That kind of came later. Tattooing is really what sort of opened my eyes to more simplified abstract forms. I personally have more of a tendency to want to render, to draw things with more complex lighting. But that doesn't always work so well tattooing. The tattoos that I find that often work the best are super simple. And so just doing that outside of your tattoo work, not waiting for a client to open this opportunity to you, and just doing it on your own. I find for me, that's really why a good reason as to why I do it. It's the soulful experience of being an artist and getting my own personal ideas out, my personal message, my own thought patterns. And, I can now sort of share this and allow people to see it and interpret it however they want, and just sort of honestly even just see how people might relate to the things I've made. Surprised at the things that people like. I swear, often things that people like the most are often the things where I'm like, I hate this. Why does anyone like this? I was thinking about throwing this thing away in the alley. Someone wants it or whatever. But that's funny. It kind of like it helps me to sort of tap into that too. I'm like, all right, they're seeing something that I didn't notice. So what is that? What is it that they like? Because I think it's awful. And so that might make me revisit that, so being able to do those things and not waiting for clients or just letting your tattoo work do that. So that's a big part of it, but also it gives me a chance to explore color in a different way. I don't try to make my tattooing look like my painting. I try to treat them very differently.
Interesting. Okay.
So for me, oil painting is oil painting. Tattooing is tattooing. They're not the same. Because with oil painting, I'm not sitting there thinking, what's this going to look like in 20 years?
Right.
Or how loose can I be? Or how much detail am I allowed to get away with? None of that matters with oil painting. You're making a nice picture. If I want to be super loose, great. If I want to be super tight and detailed, great. If I want to have lost edges and a lot of these things that I just come from a mindset of tattooing that's, I think, much more traditional when it comes to like the longevity of a tattoo. So artwork outside of tattooing frees me from those restrictions, and those are self-imposed restrictions.
Okay.
But those are things I've learned, just from my time in tattooing. I've been doing this over 2 decades. I see how tattoos age. And, when you start doing a lot of large work, it's like, I don't want to have to redo someone's tattoo that I just did 5 years ago because I was trying to get a really cool painterly, Instagram photo. And that's for me, I'm not saying that that's what other tattooers should do, but it is definitely something I think about. I don't want tattoos on me that aren't going to age well. I don't want to make tattoos that go on people that aren't going to age well. That is the number one thing that I think about when I'm tattooing is, how is this going to age? But with painting, I can escape that. I don't have to worry about that at all. It gives me an opportunity to sort of say, "Phew,
That's awesome, dude."
Cool." So yeah, that's there's that.
It's fascinating that you say that, because I know that there are some artists that are out there that hold on, and I'm gonna actually remove this and we'll set that up for speaker. So I know that there are certain artists that are out there that actually find a correlation, and they tattoo like they oil paint, and they oil paint like they tattoo, and they follow a very similar process. And it's their way of continuing on to keep their hand moving even when they're not in the midst of tattooing, but you're taking a very different approach to it, and that's something that I heavily respect. Is that you draw that line and you draw that division between the tattoos that you do and the aspects that you're looking for in those tattoos, and then the secondary artwork that you create outside of that. And the fact that you focus on longevity, is a very important part. It's a very important thing. And the more artists that I talk to in this day and age, that have this kind of experience and this kind of a background behind them, it's something that I find to be a parallel between a lot of different artists, where they're really focused on that longevity. They're not planning for how's this going to look, in a year or two. They're thinking, how is this tattoo that I just did, how is that going to look 40 or 50 years down the road?
Yeah.
How is this going to age, and how can I design this to last even longer?
Yeah.
And that to me is fascinating. I love that aspect. So
yeah.
But we do have several other questions and stuff like that to get through. So let's move on to the next one. And I'm going to spotlight you again. So how would you categorize the style or type of tattoos that you really like to do?
I like to do illustrative tattooing. So meaning that I draw things in a way that are representational of the way things actually look in real life. So I try to use more realistic anatomy. Try to actually study the way something actually looks. And then what I also focus on is trying to give things movement. So Art Nouveau. So I like to think that I do an illustrative Art Nouveau that's kind of neo-traditional in a way. I'm not a fan of saying like I do like doing a lot of Japanese stuff. That's super prominent in my work, that you can see there's that influence. But I don't think of myself as an artist that does that, even though I definitely do that stuff. Or like I do a lot of biomechanical stuff. But I also don't think of myself as an artist who's a biomechanical artist. I think that the things that I'm doing with those types of art are just an extension of Art Nouveau. The category that I think of is I do an illustrative Art Nouveau that has the qualities that I find similar in traditional tattooing: black lines, black shading, large open space, solid saturation of color, that type of thing.
Well, that's actually, you just touched on something that was going to be one of my next questions. If you had to pick one element in the tattoos that you do, whether it be, depth or color or lighting or contrast or the use of line or composition, if there was one thing that you would say you really try to look at and you really try to put the most emphasis on, what would it be?
Composition.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason I say that is if it's well composed, meaning the designed to fit the form well, that is the hardest part of the struggle. in being a great tattooer. And then the second would be outlines, being good at making clean black lines, and then black shading, putting shadows down, those three things, no color at all. If you're designing it so it fits the body and the spaces are large so that they will age well. If you just use black lines and black shading, no color at all, and it looks good, that is a true way to sort of see into the future of your tattoo. Like, if this looks good from across the street, just as black lines, black shading, and say 60% of it is skin, that's going to be a great tattoo. If it's missing those components, to me, it's kind of a failure tattoo, at least for me, those are the two things, that I really think of the most. Composition, use of black, and when I say composition, meaning sized appropriately, not
Right.
just how it flows and fits on someone. Is it sized appropriately?
Awesome. Now that actually brings me up to another question. Do you prefer to work on large scale multi-session pieces, or do you prefer to work, primarily with smaller, like one shot, start to finish that day, or maybe 2 days back to back? What scale do you usually prefer to work with?
As big as possible. That's my preferred.
Okay. Awesome. That's what I like to hear. Is there a reason behind that? Do you like to see the evolution of it over time? Do you just feel like it fits the body better, or that you have more room for the composition? Do you feel like you can achieve more detail or more, rendering where you need to with it? Any specific reasoning why?
I think compositionally, it prevents mistakes. Like back in the 90s, right? Before the 90s, 80s, 70s, excluding Japanese tattooing and Polynesian tattooing,
Right.
the Western type of tattooing or commercial type of tattooing was pick a little thing, get a little thing, pick a little thing, get a little thing, pick a little thing, get a little thing. And so when you're done, even if each one of those things is done really well, it's a mess. It doesn't work well together. It's not a thought out composition. And since tattoos are permanent and we only get so many opportunities to do this, my thought is use as much space as the client is willing to let you use, and try to draw it as simple as possible for the space. And that's a little bit of an arm wrestle with the client, like the way I would prefer to draw things. Like there's the ideal tattoo I want to do, and then the tattoo the client will let me do, so, there's a little bit of a compromise, that's just the reality of tattooing. I think that's really my reason for it. It's just I want to be able to be thinking ahead, and that's something I actually learned from Denny when he taught me. He said, I actually love this. It's such a funny way to describe it. He's like, I don't think of myself as a tattooer. And he goes, I think of myself as a tailor, because in the end, I'm making a suit. and I remember when he told me that, I was like, that is the craziest, most amazing thing I've ever heard. And I don't know if that's an original thing from him or if that's just something he picked up somewhere, but it made so much sense to me, especially when I saw like persons like Philip Blue's work, for the first time, and how well he thought about the future of the tattoo. Like if someone wanted a dragon, right? He'd be like, yeah, cool, we're going to do a dragon. We're just going to do like the claw here. And then like, you're going to see like a chunk of its head and you're good. And, most people would be like, oh, I want to get a dragon from here to here. And they're going to want the whole goddamn dragon. And Philip was like, no, you got a claw or then that's it. Or maybe
we're going to do a claw and then like an eyebrow and an eye. And then
right.
that will give you the idea of the dragon without it being a full dragon, but it's going to take up your entire back.
Right.
You know?
So he's already thinking of doing everything.
Right.
And let's say, and if the person chooses not to do everything, it's still okay. They still end up with a cool looking tattoo that will age great. It's not just, social media ruins these things. Everything's like for this little picture in your phone. And, so people, younger tattooers, and this isn't your fault. This is social media. This is just the way that those platforms work, is that they really celebrate things that can be seen in one little picture. And really, that's just not how tattoos, can work. For me, that higher level of tattooing reaches for that full body composition. And yeah, social media doesn't reward that. Unfortunately, social media rewards. This is a 14-year-old person that's on the platform. They don't know anything about tattoos, and they're gonna like something that they think they might get. And they're not thinking, oh, I'm gonna get a whole fucking body of tattoos. Excuse my language. They're thinking, oh, I'm gonna get this rad little thing. They don't know about how it ages or any of that stuff. Right. None of that stuff matters to them. And they don't, and why would it? They wouldn't know that? I didn't know that before I started getting tattooed. And if I got a lot of things that I would have got, in, my late teens, early 20s, I'd have a lot of weird stuff on me, and so I'm glad
you and me both.
Yeah.
You and me both.
Yeah. So many of us.
Yeah.
Do actually.
Well, yeah. I've been getting quite a few cover-ups done over the past few years, and I was actually I was over at Hyperspace Studio. I've been going there like once every 18 months or so, getting Guy to work on a cover-up for me, and just looking at the process that he's using is just mind-blowing, right? Got tattoos when I was younger and didn't really, I got them more or less because one of the artists I was working with was trying to build their portfolio and wanted to do a piece to put in their portfolio. So, okay, cool, fine, whatever. I've got this blank area on my leg. Like, yeah, fill it in. Why not? Right? Looking at it years down the road, you turn around and you look at it and you're like, why did I do that? That was not a good decision. This is definitely not what I need or want right now. This is not what my bigger vision is for how I want my body to look, overall. But a lot of people that are younger don't have that kind of, concept of time and how they really want their bodies to look. So I get it. I do. But it also gives us a chance to practice cover-ups, and it can be a fun thing. Some of it can be way more challenging, but we learn. But speaking of which, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have faced in your career so far, and how have you overcome them?
Owning a business, for one, was probably one of the biggest, more recent challenge. I mean, I say recent, I think I've had this shop almost 13 years now. Trying to transition from just being an artist at someone else's shop to being a business owner, and now dealing with, trying to like lead the ship and be responsible, or be a good leader, be a good listener, try not to be a micromanager. We have there's 10 of us that all tattoo here in my shop. That's a
big studio.
What's that?
That's a big studio.
Well, it is and it isn't. We have, it's funny. Like, I'm in California, in San Diego.
Oh, true.
Yeah, real estate is it's at a premium here. So
yeah.
So we have 8 seats in the shop. 2 of the seats are actually, we have a garage that's remodeled, and that has 2 of the stations out there. But there are 10 tattooers here. Two of them are part-time. They're only here a day or two a week. Life circumstances, so really at the most we can have 8 in a day. And honestly, like, it's very rare that we have all 8 stations going. Maybe 1 or 2 days a week that we might have all 8 going. Most of the time it's about 4 or 5 of us working in a day. Bill, it's expensive out here, man.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
It's like, it takes so many of us just to just to break even. Like, how long does it take to break even? How long does it take to, so there's that, like things that I didn't know, before I owned a shop. When I used to work for other people, I'd be like, why do they do it that way? And you're like, I imagine that they're like making all this money, and then when I finally go do it myself, I'm like, geez, sometimes I think I did better working for other people.
Right.
It's kind of impressive, like how much money it all takes. Having a counter person, that realizing how important that person is. That's the hello at the door. That's the hello on the phone. Trying to get that person to do the thing that a lot of tattooers just can't. I am the absolute worst at multitasking. I don't want to talk to someone who's asking about a tattoo while I'm currently tattooing someone. Like those kind of things. Like all that stuff is a very big challenge for me. Going from just an artist at a shop to owning my own shop. And the first 5 years of owning the shop, honestly, I sort of was depressed about it a little bit. Like there was this, wondering like, oh, when do I get to, make my art? When do I get to not feel like just this tattoo machine? I worked 60, 70 hours a week still. This is 13 years into owning a shop.
Right.
Like, when does it get, it doesn't, but I'm at more piece of that. I've learned how to sort of purposely take time off at certain points of the year to do that. And to, hey, if I get a cancellation that day, oh man, sweet nectar. I need it, so that stuff. Before owning a shop, man, it was just like, I want to get the opportunities to do the big stuff, because the guy that I learned from, Denny, that's what he did, was big stuff. I also learned Nate Wellness worked there, Chris Walken worked there. These were great tattooers, all of them. So they were, big influences to me. For sure. And so, and I think that's part of the reason why I do a lot of the tattooing that I do is this sort of illustrative meets biomech, meets Japanese, meets Art Nouveau. Because honestly, that's kind of a little bit of what everyone in that shop was doing, and I think I just sort of took my favorite pieces, from each person I was working around and each artist they introduced me to. And, and I was like, all right, these are my favorite pieces. How do I put this together and, write my story with tattooing? So trying to figure out what I wanted to even say with tattooing. And then, trying to get those clients that wanted that, and a big part of it was just drawing, painting, drawing. For the first 5-6 years, it was a little bit of the opposite of what I was talking about, where I keep my painting separate from my tattooing. There was a long while where I sort of abandoned, more traditional art in favor of doing things that looked like a tattoo. I was like, I want to understand like how to draw like a tattooer, and I want to make designs for tattooing, which was beneficial to me. It gave me an opportunity to showcase my artwork in my station, put it online, and different places where I could do that. And then people could then see what I was trying to make. And, financially, this, didn't help me much. But there's something, what else I also did is, you know, if I had friends or like certain clients that I was close with, I was like, all right, you're the person that gets the hookup. You're the person I'm going to come in and tattoo every other weekend for, I don't know, give me a fucking sandwich.
Right.
Give me nothing. Your skin is payment, you know, to build that portfolio. And I mean, you got to be careful with that though. Like, you know, it's one thing I tried to address with all the people that I would take care of like that is my hourly rate is this. If anyone asks you, this is my hourly rate.
Right.
Yo, this is my buddy, hook me up. Because I don't want to hook up anyone else. I'm hooking up you. I'm not hooking up your cousin, your friend, your neighbor. Right. I don't care. You know, you're the unicorn. The rest of them, they got to pay me, you know? And so that's something else that I, you know, had to learn kind of where to cut that off, you know? But, you know, it was super helpful. You know, when I hear tattooers, and I've been doing this 10 years or whatever, like, oh, I never get to do what I want to do. And I'm like, do you? Why is that? You know, and for me, I just found that, and that's, I don't want to be mean, like sound like I'm making fun of someone that would think like that, you know, because I can understand like that's frustrating, but there is a solution. And the solution is we all know people that probably would get the things that we want, but just financially aren't capable of doing it. And if that's someone I'm close with and I feel like I can get that exchange with, and not in a way that I'm being taken advantage of, where this is a mutual exchange. I'm getting the skin for my portfolio, and they're getting this rad tattoo. Yeah, so you know, hey, if every one of us that wasn't reaching what we wanted as tattoo artists, you know, just took 5 or 10 clients aside every year, and then just said, these are my portfolio people. I don't care what bum, nowhere, middle of nowhere, no one can see you town you live, you can find these people and you can make that portfolio. And that's gonna, because people want to see it, you know, that's just the truth of it. You know, it doesn't like I remember in the beginning, I thought, man, I'm gonna just do this rad drawing and people are gonna see it and then they're gonna know that I can do it. And then that's not what would happen. I would do this, you know, thing that I was really, you know, stoked on. And then the person would end up getting tattooed by some other more experienced tattooer in town that kind of couldn't really draw the things that I was drawing, you know, right. But we're like doing a thing that I was trying to do. And that was so frustrating to me because the reality is I didn't have it in my portfolio as a tattoo. So no matter how well I could draw it, you know, someone who's going to pay good money may not give that to you because they're like, well, I'm looking in your book and all I see is this, and you're telling me you want this? Yeah, you know. So that was for me a way to do that. You know, try to get those clients, you know, that wanted that, and you know that was how we did it. You know, put the artwork out there, find people that were willing to, not in a way that was going to take advantage of me, that was mutually beneficial. Yeah, you know, that was a lot of it, you know.
Awesome. What do you see as some of the current or future challenges that you may be facing, you know, in the next, I don't know, 10 years or so? And how are you planning on preparing for those?
So that's
I know I'm throwing that to you out of left field here, but
there's a few different things. AI, you know, I think that's a potential problem. I think for the fakers, it's gonna make it easier for them to be fakers. I'm not all that worried about it because we've had Photoshop forever. We've had photocopy machines and photographs forever. You know, there is nothing stopping anyone from tracing things and sticking things together and rendering things, you know. And you know, and maybe that's really mean of me to say fakers, you know, like it's really just a different design process. It's just one that I don't connect to. So maybe I want to be gentle. say that. You know?
I feel you. I feel you on that. You know, I think
Like,
AI is a big concern for a lot of artists out there, and you know, it's like, how do we prepare for that? How do we approach that?
yeah.
But
So I think that AI can offer a way to thumbnail some things, get some ideas, but ultimately, in the end, at least for me, I want to draw. I want to do the hard work and draw it. Like, um, so I use photo reference. I look at photos when I draw. I use anatomy books when I draw. Um, but I do retain a lot of that stuff so that if the book isn't there, or the photo isn't there, I can invent things with my mind. And I can do things in a way that literally no one else can do. I can do it the way that I know how to, you know.
right,
And computers aren't doing that. What they're doing is they're sourcing existing work from other artists on the internet or wherever they're getting it, and they are mishmashing these things together and kind of churning something out. And to be honest, a lot of it's beautiful. If I was like this would be one of the greatest top tier illustrators today. Look at this. This is amazing. But you're not, I don't believe we're going to see the next Alphonse Mucha, Aaron Kane, Guy Aitchison, Philip Liu. We're not going to see that from that.
right.
What we're going to see is the next sort of carbon copy of the thing that was already there. I encourage people to not be afraid of technology, but I also encourage people to not just only use the technology. It is a tool. It is not the answer. At least not for me. It's not the answer for me. So that's one thing that I think about a lot, and I think that clients appreciate that a lot. I think a lot of clients, just the idea of getting something that's AI tattooed on is repulsive. I think a lot of, and I don't mean that there's anything wrong with it. There isn't anything wrong with it. I don't want to sound like I'm judging people. I want to be clear that I want to do what works for me. And what I believe works for my clients. I think that making something unique for me and for my client is very important to me. And that's the audience I want to talk to. That's the audience I want to connect with, and that's how I'd like to keep it. And I think for a lot of young artists that maybe don't feel like they have the chops drawing wise, my answer is AI is not going to do that for you. Take time drawing every day. Lots. I draw every day. I am 45 years old. Since I was 3 years old, I had drawn almost every single day of my life. And it's just so necessary to me.
It comes back to that actually reminds me of a great quote that I once heard, where the hard way is actually the easy way, right? When you do something the hard way and you take the long road to get there, you're going to encounter less problems and you're going to be able to do things that other people wouldn't do, which is going to make it easier for you in the long run. But by taking the quick way, it's actually going to be a lot longer of a journey for you to actually understand those things and apply them later on. So the hard way is actually the easy way when it comes down to tattoos and drawing and painting and, producing artwork. It's a personal philosophy that I live by. So I try to draw as much as I can of my own stuff, all the time. Much like yourself, I'll have a photo reference or something like that. Like, oh, here's a really cool angle of a wolf head, or oh, I really like the way that this artist drew this tiger with this perspective, or the way that the tail on this tiger kind of wraps around in this unique direction. So I'll take that and it's like, okay, cool. Let me draw something of my own that maybe, hints at or is inspired by this thing over here, but it's going to be my own creation. I'm going to deconstruct say I'm drawing a tiger. I'm going to deconstruct the tiger. I'm going to look at tiger anatomy. I'm going to look at how do tigers' paws move? You know, if they have their claws out, how is that going to change the shape and direction? How are their ears going to fold back if they get angry? You know, or if they're attacking something? You know, if you're going strictly based off of, you know, photos that you find, you're almost never going to find that one perfect photo that you're looking for.
No.
I mean, you may occasionally, like maybe once a decade, find it. Otherwise, you have to go through and you have to take that hard road to create the images that you really need to create for the outcome that you want to have.
Yeah, you know, grab your phone and take your friend outside and throw a sheet on it.
Yeah, perfect.
You know, here, stick these flowers in your hair, like whatever you got to do. Like, you know, so me and my girlfriend Jasmine Worth, she's an amazing oil painter, and yeah, we shoot reference pretty often. You know, because hey, I need to draw something, I need to paint something. Like that's just a great way to do it when I can't find the resources online. You know, another super cool trick that Chris Cockrell, an artist that works here, mentioned to me. He said, you know, if you find the way or the name of something in another language, do that image search. You know?
Oh yeah,
you already know.
I've used that plenty of fucking times.
Yeah, you see different things. You know,
absolutely. Because we're only thinking in our native language, right? Like when we say human skull, that's fine, but that's human skull being pronounced in our native language. But if you go to other languages, you type in, you know, go to Google Translate, type in human skull in Portuguese, human skull in, you know, I don't know, Norwegian, right? You're going to get a completely different set of results, because those graphic searches are only based off of those keywords in that language, right? It's not going to translate those keywords for you. So that's a trick I use all the time. You know, but that's, once again, that's me. And if I'm looking for like a new unique perspective on something, awesome. That's exact. I'll go through and I'll do that, and I'll find, you know, and I hate to kind of bring this reference up, but you know, I'll find a full body of the red-tailed fox, you know, and I hesitate on bringing that up only because of the latest, you know, tattoo gate thing, but you know, I'll find a full body, and then it's like, oh, I like the way that the paws are in that. Cool. Let me sit down. I'm going to draw my own fox, you know, in my own way, using my own mind. And then it's like, if I need to go back through and reference that, if I need to see, okay, how did this tail wrap around? Okay, cool. Now I can look at that one part, but I'm going to try to draw as much of it from my own mind as I possibly can. You know, but that's, once again, that's just kind of the way that my mind works. I've noticed in a lot of your posts, you have a lot of, like, for lack of a better term, you've got a golden spiral in there that you use to really kind of start out any kind of like mapping for tattoos or conceptual ideas or anything like that. It almost seems like that tends to be your base layer. Are you using any other outside of like the rule of thirds, which you already mentioned? Are you using any other kind of like old oil painting master, you know, kind of tricks that might be beneficial for other people to know about to help them improve composition? Any other tricks or things like that that you think we might find, you know, helpful?
Yeah. Yes. So as far as the golden ratio, it's something I mostly use in my paintings because it is set up for a rectangle. But there are places on people's body where you can place this rectangle. I have these body templates that I've used for years. I drew them, and I have repeating golden ratios in what I think are common logical places for them to be. I don't always keep those golden ratios in those same spaces on those bodysuits. And sometimes I just flat out ignore them because I don't want it to look, because the tattoo composition is very continuous. It isn't, again, on a flat piece of paper, but I want to be mindful of that. And what I find if I'm trying to problem solve, like how to draw something, having a golden ratio as an underlayer and then drawing on top of that, it gives me logical stopping points. If I'm drawing a tiger or a bird or whatever, it gives me places because the ways that the lines intersect as to where to stop. You go, all right, if I'm going to move the wing here and there's this line, I'm going to stop it here. So I try to think of it that way. What golden ratio is actually doing, the way that I understand it, it's basically breaking everything down from 60 to 40. So it's 60% of that rectangle is a square, and then 40% is the rectangle. And then that next rectangle would be 60% square, 40% rectangle. So it's a repeating series of 60-40. And that is a simple way to break down a design and say, all right, 60% of this will be my main image, 40% of it will be my background. And you can actually flip that around. You can also say 40% will be the main image, 60% of the background. For tattooing, you really want the primary image, not so much the background. That also works for shadows. 40% of my image is going to be in shadows. That just works great for tattooing. So meaning 40% black, lines included. It's going to work. It just works. Your eyes like it. I don't have to think about it. It just works. Color, 60% warm, 40% cool or neutral. So I try to repeat that like a mantra in my head, and sometimes more successfully than other times, but I try to have that in my mind when I'm drawing, when I'm tattooing, when I'm rendering, painting, to really use that. I try to avoid, although with tattoos, sometimes it works for like chest or even a back. I try to avoid what's known as a bullseye composition, which is like all the attention is right in the middle of the square. Really, part of that rule of thirds, which is really a breakdown of 60-40, is that you don't want to put all your information in the middle of the panel or say person's body, right? You really want that attention to be somewhere above or below or to the side of that center. That's where your focus should be. It causes the viewer's eyes to want to move around the image. So that way you don't have this tendency to just rest your eyes right in the middle and they kind of see nothing else. Because, what I'm trying to show the person that's viewing my artwork is I'm trying to guide them through the whole piece. If they just look right in the middle, they're not going to see all the other things that I worked hard on. So that's really what I'm trying to do with that. That's something I learned it from my dad when I was a kid. It's just a basic rule of photography. Web developers use it. Well, they used to. Now it's designed on a phone. It kind of doesn't work so well anymore, but it used to back right. In the day. That was a thing. So that's what I use.
Would you mind if I actually went through? I'm just here surfing your Instagram page, which I'd like to share for everyone. Sure. I was going to pull up one of the posts that you have, and maybe you could just take a quick minute, walk us through a few things that you're doing on here, and how maybe explain to us what's going through your mind as you're working on it. Mm-hmm. If that would be okay with you.
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So we've got Terry Ribera's Instagram page. Go through and make sure that you give him a like and a follow. Send him a message if you live in the San Diego area to get tattooed. Dude does awesome work. This is one that I found that I absolutely love it. I wish there was a way that you could like pause it and slow-mo it, but I don't think you really can.
Not on Instagram.
Well, you can pause it. You can pause it. But
okay, cool. All right.
So
Yeah.
why don't you give us a quick little idea of, like what you're going off of, what you're trying to achieve? What are some of the things that you're looking to accomplish in certain aspects of this?
Yeah. Yeah. So you can see right off the gate, before I even like really went too far in any of the layout, I put two lines, these V-shaped lines, and those are just really to break up the overall space. And roughly where the bottom V stops is about 60% of that total composition from the back of the knee to the top of the shoulders. And so you can see that that happens again at the shoulder.
So you're
So
talking about this line here?
nah, the right around where the V, the top of the V sort of stops. Yeah, that's about 60% from the back of the knee to that whole composition of the top to the top of the shoulders.
Okay.
And then again it repeats. Same thing. That next V stops at roughly 60% where the armpits are to the top of the shoulders.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is this having this constant sequence of things breaking down from 60-40, 60-40. And I'll do that through the whole drawing. So then as I start to refine each of those segments, I'm repeating that mantra in my head. What percentage of this shape is going to be simple and easy to look at, and what percentage of the shape is going to be more complex? So with the body, I'm looking for things that kind of go a little bit past what the golden ratio is doing. I am just looking for rhythm lines. And so a rhythm line, that I'm looking for are breaks in the body. So an armpit, there's a breaking point. An elbow, there's a breaking point. The wrist, it's a breaking point. The bottom of your buttocks to your hip, there's a breaking point. So finding where these natural rhythmic points are and just sort of drawing an S curve or a French curve. In this design, I did it symmetrical, but you can also break this and run the line completely across the body if you want to. And so you don't have to do a symmetrical design. And that's really what I'm focusing on, is this repetition of 60-40, simple shapes to complex shapes. Yes, hopefully that makes
Fascinating.
sense.
It does. In fact, if we actually, you have one in here, I believe it was this peony back piece, where this is a really good example of how you can flow those shapes, all the way across the whole body to really kind of accent certain things, and really create a gorgeous asymmetrical kind of composition. I love watching this video, by the way. To me, it's like mesmerizing. Just lay out your composition, how everything fits and flows with the body in such an amazing way. And we'll pause it right there for just a minute, but you've got foreground and background interaction. You've got all of these like elements that are kind of being clouded by water. So you can already tell that they're going to be kind of visible, but not super visible. These great directional lines that are done with a negative space for, the tops of, Japanese style isobars and wind and wave bars. But those really help draw your eye all the way up through the whole piece, to really force you to kind of take a look at the this peony flower all the way up at the top. It's this whole composition is drawing your eye right to this area. And you've got all of these gorgeous directional lines. I'm trying to annotate on my laptop. Not exactly going very well as far as drawing goes, but if you've ever tried to draw anything using a mouse pad, you'll know the struggle I'm having.
Yeah.
But you've got all of these gorgeous lines literally forcing your eye up to this one centralized focal point. And it literally, it mesmerizes me every time I watch it.
Well, thank you.
But it's a great way to go through and kind of illustrate, what you were just talking about, how sometimes you can cut straight across a body and it'll still work and still look incredible. Even in an asymmetrical kind of perspective.
Yeah. So this one I actually like a good bit, because of really just how simple it is. Often I find that my favorite work from myself or even other people, it's not often the things that are overly complex. I like things that are just really easy for me to look at, that don't, they grab my attention quickly, and I find it less exhausting to look at. Like, I want to sit and enjoy the composition, and just sort of be appreciative of just the simplicity of the design. Something I've, in more recent years have tried to, well, I've been trying to do this kind of approach from the beginning of tattooing, and it is hard, to get clients to think that way. Most of the time, I've made a few bodysuits in my life, and they're always sort of like accidental bodysuits.
Right.
I would rather them be like sort of like large picture, easy to understand. Like, if I took this design that you're showing right now, if I cropped it into a rectangle, it'd be just like a cool business card or sticker,
right?
Cool t-shirt.
Absolutely.
Design. Just very readable. I'm not trying to make it so that everything needs to be interesting from a few inches away. If anything, that's what I am trying to work against. It's not about how awesome it looks from a few inches. It's this person is across the street, and I see this big old skull and these kind of larger, sort of, simpler, ornate forms, biomechanical, Art Nouveau, whatever that I've got going on in there. Very readable. That's
well,
what
you kind of, with images like this, when you're looking at, large scale composition, I almost find that you can't be right up on it to see, tiny little minutia in there. In order to get an idea of the entire picture, you have to stand back further so that your eye can capture the entire piece.
Yeah.
So it forces you to take a few steps back. But I think a lot of that comes into the planning stage, right? Where if you're planning out a piece this big, you don't need to zoom all the way in and get tiny little nooks and crannies and stuff like that, because that's going to be lost when someone steps, 6, 7, 8 feet away to capture the entire image. So, that's just something I've picked up on, but, by focusing on these large simplistic shapes and large gradients, really focusing on the 20-foot view as opposed to the 2-foot view, it's fascinating just to see the amount of detail that you can capture with that and how you're planning it out so that, everything is cohesive as one bigger, larger image. It's just something that's always drawn me towards your work. So thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, so something that Denny had brought up to me when I, first year tattooing, he was very blunt, I'll say that. But he would talk about tattooing, and he's like, it's really important that you're not like, you don't want to destroy the person's body. Like, we're looking at their form, and we're trying to, and there's me and Jasmine, we're trying to enhance the lines that are already there. We're trying to highlight their body. This isn't just, I'm making my cool artwork, so yeah.
Yeah, this piece is just
Thanks.
This is a whole nother level of how do I do that?
Yeah, I
Like
guess,
this is the kind of stuff that I remember 15 years ago when I first came across like your profile, and I started looking at your work back when I was in college. And I just remember sitting back saying to myself, how does he do that? What what is going on inside his mind where everything works so well? You've got emphasis where you need it. You've got some background elements that are cool, but still pretty vague, so that way they don't get to be too distracting. Like, how does this happen? You know, um, and I've taken a lot of time to sit down and, I've literally taken images of yours and I've studied them and I've said, okay, here's some of the things that he's using. Here's, some of the little tricks. Yeah, oh, okay, this part's got a nice big old outline on it, but a lot of these parts don't. So that's going to be a lot more diffused in the background because, it's there more or less as background image. It doesn't really need a whole lot of emphasis. Here's where his light source is coming from. Here's why this shadow is here. Here's why this texture is here. But, the more and more I dive into it, the more and more I pick out different things like your use of long gradients to draw the eye. And a lot of times I find artists aren't necessarily even conscious of the fact that that's what they're doing. And some artists I know, they're like, I don't know, I just like to draw stuff, and you can break it down however you want, but I just find that it works and it's visually appealing, so I continue to do that. But coming from, the more technical art background, it's fascinating to see someone using all of these tricks, but also understanding how these tricks come into play and how they get used appropriately and how you can really maximize focal points and really strong imagery by utilizing all these little tricks. I don't know if that really makes sense, but
yeah, it does. Yeah, it's I think it's like kind of like building a house, right? Like you want to have a good foundation. You want to frame the walls. You don't just jump straight to the drywall and do finish trim.
Right.
So that is a big part of it, and that is just a good rule of drawing. Doesn't matter if you're doing a bodysuit or a drawing of a duck. Make sure that the frame is good. If your initial lay-in, your initial composition isn't working, don't start moving ahead.
Right.
Like find those good rhythm lines. Does this do 60/40? That's how I like to think of it. And then once I'm comfortable with the general shapes, all right, now I can go that next layer. Sometimes if you're watching some of these videos of mine, just because I'm comfortable drawing certain things, I'll kind of jump ahead. That's more a bad habit. Don't do that.
Right. Well, we get into our comfort zones and, we decide to start like, oh, okay, well, I've drawn, these shapes or these elements 1,000 times. Like I already know how they're going to interact. I already know how they're going to deconstruct and what I have to do in certain areas. So if you've drawn something, I think 12,000 times, okay, fine. Maybe you can start taking some shortcuts, but otherwise it's like, take it step by step. But there's nothing wrong if you've got that kind of experience, man. Take a couple shortcuts if you already know how it's gonna lay out and how it's gonna land, and if you already know what you're trying to achieve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Like sometimes just because I'm so comfortable drawing certain things, I can kind of jump around a little bit because I can basically see it already in my mind. Or maybe, especially now that we have like things like Procreate and Photoshop and other digital ways to draw. It's very easy to jump ahead, draw things, move things, so sometimes I find it helpful. And on a lot of times, I want to go back to something I've already drawn and be like, all right, where are the weird parts? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
so let's find the parts that have like weird tangents, 3 lines that are all touching, intersecting at the same place. You're like, all right, well, that's, I don't want to have tangents, or, and that can happen easily, especially with like biomech stuff. It's easy to make a tangent and that stuff. Japanese stuff for sure, the way the water and flowers can line up and get like weird tangents sometimes. Art Nouveau, you can get tangents, so trying to find those, like, after you've done the drawing, okay, fine, make this little area bigger or smaller, or just move it to the right a little bit. I can eliminate some of these tangents, because a lot of times we have too many lines that are intersecting and touching at the same point. It forces your eye to rest at that point, and then again, now the person isn't viewing the whole piece of artwork. So right. That's something to think about. Yeah, just that type of thing. Yeah, but really, just trying to be loose when you first draw stuff, and trying not to get to the end. It's more beneficial to be slow in the beginning. That's because I've heard this place, or someone said this before, that you're either giving yourself, if this is a high five to your future self, or a fuck you to your future self. So I'm trying to set myself up for success. So spending that time, doing the initial lay-in. Don't jump ahead and be like, all right, I gotta draw this super nice eye. Like, who cares how nice the eye is? If the body is like all the way to the right of the composition, and your shoulders touching like the edge of the paper or the person's body or whatever, that's weird. Fix
right.
that first. No one's gonna look at how cool the nose is and the hair if your design's all out of whack. So another thing that I try to do, and you might notice this in my videos, and I really try to explain this to a lot of artists, is I try to draw with straight lines. I try to actually draw mostly with straight lines, and that sounds really weird, because when you look at composition, you see these big swooping like S curves. Yes, that's true. Like maybe my initial lay-in will have like a few of these big sweeping lines, but the individual parts that I'm drawing, especially if I'm drawing something that's like an anatomical form and I'm using my reference image that I'm looking at, it's really important for me to draw the straight line. So I'll use my head for example, like this line is important. This line is important. This line is important. So just those 3 lines, right? Just getting those lines right, I know that everything as it breaks down inside that space will be correct, because I want to make sure that that's right. So what most people do is they draw a head, then they try to draw a body, in which you do want to do that at some point. But if you don't get your angles right, then all of a sudden shoulders too long, and then you got a weird saggy eye. So breaking things down into the simplest forms, which are really just get your angles right. And you can apply that to absolutely anything you're drawing, and you automatically will be a much better drafts person when you're trying to draw and get your initial like framing, the original initial construction of whatever you're drawing. Even if you don't totally understand the anatomy of what you're drawing, breaking things down into the simple shapes, simple planes, even like, where do I put these shadows? Well, you can see it, make a line that tells me a stopping point, rather than trying to guess and And also there's something that's really nice about doing that. And something, and this is one of these things I've brought up to, other artists that I've worked with, is liking to use a combination of straight lines and curved lines. If you draw everything with curved lines, it's just not as interesting looking. The line just doesn't have the natural calligraphy to it. If you're drawing with straight lines and with curved lines, and trying to keep that 60-40 ratio, that I like keep bringing up, all of a sudden your lines are going to be more dynamic. They're going to have more calligraphy. They're going to have more of your signature in it, because you're able to pick, like, if I make this swoop here, I'm adding this expression to this line. If I'm making it straighter here, all of a sudden this looks more dynamic. Maybe I want to emphasize like how angular that shape is. So really thinking about the actual shape, not just like put a big smoothie line over it, like,
right.
And that can work for certain things. You look at a lot of traditional tattoos, kind of are rounded. But I find the people that really do that well, they think that way. They are thinking about, where are my straight lines? Where are my curved lines? Not everything is just round. So I love Bern Hogarth as far as his anatomy goes, dynamic, the hands and all that stuff. The guy's a master of anatomy. He could explain anatomy way better than I ever could. But a big criticism that a lot of people have about his, and I don't know what, maybe this is not the case in the books, our artwork beyond what he was trying to show as a teaching tool. Everything's drawn with a curve. And so because of that, everything looks like it noodly, all the shapes are noodly looking. Everything's curved looking. It doesn't look as mature. And my guess is that was really just to, for a teaching tool. It's just to help someone to kind of understand these shapes. But if you look at, say, Loomis, Leyendecker especially, his paintings are sort of the opposite. Very heavily focused on straight lines. Everything looks very chiseled, calligraphied, kind of tiling paint on. I think that that kind of approach has a lot more interesting character, and just I can sort of tell, and I could see that person's sort of sharp, immediate choices, making angular shapes like that rather than a big smoothie thing. I'm making kind of a dumb face about it, like I don't want to be insulting anyone that's doing, because I do a lot of smooth, elegant things too. Art Nouveau is part of what I love about it. These elegant, smooth shapes. But again, Alphonse Mucha, the godfather of Art Nouveau, the actual floral, structures or ornate patterns are very smooth and elegant, but then the flowers will have a series of very straight lines. The human figures, straight lines, even the drapery, the fabric, all, if you look at it, you're like, oh, I see this big curvy thing. Look at it. You actually don't. You're actually seeing this relationship between straight and curved lines. And I think that it just, for me, it just makes a better drawing. It looks more mature. It makes a difference between something that looks like a cartoon and something that looks more real. Even though I'm trying to do illustrative work, I'm not really trying to shoot for true realism, but there's a way to sort of just through those abstractions, those simple choices, it looks more real, to sort of think about those shapes that way. At least it does to me. I believe that's a good system for it, and trust me, I'm a person that from tattooing, I didn't used to be like this before tattooing. I started, I feel like maybe using too many curved lines because of tattooing. It sort of makes sense for tattooing, but in more recent years, really been trying to step away from that and just trying to think about the angles, and I think in part when I started tattooing, it was sort of the opposite. It was very focused on doing more straight lines, and I think because it was, hey, the '90s, new schooly stuff, graffiti influence, so it had a lot of this angular type of stuff. Probably a lot of the comic books I looked at, and then and then when I started tattooing, I look at all these traditional tattoos, Japanese tattoos, and they didn't really have those. So I think I was trying hard to make my work look like tattoo work. And then after enough years of that, I was like, cool. It looks more like tattoo stuff, but I'm kind of making it like this is just I believe a mistake in art, is that really there should be some variation. I think, and that's definitely something. I'll probably do that for the rest of my life. I'm going to sound like very like, this is the way, until I find out that's not the way.
Right.
Yeah. You got to be willing to criticize yourself and grow and admit, I used to think this.
Yeah. Well, I used to think that way, but I've learned a bit since then.
Or feel different about it. So
I've got one final question before we start wrapping everything up. If you had to give one piece of advice out there to any new budding artist or tattoo artist out there, one little piece of advice, maybe it was a piece of advice that was given to you as you were coming up, or not that you haven't already given us plenty to think about, but if you had to pick maybe one thing, one piece of advice to pass on to like the next generation, what would it be?
Draw. Draw.
One word answer. Perfect. Emphasis. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything more valuable than that. If you're going to be an artist, I don't care what medium I'm doing, draw. Like that's, that is the essence, the spirit of what we are doing, is learning to draw from life and creating my own visual library, to help me describe the world the way that I see it, and to learn from, the things I'm seeing. The only way to get there is from drawing. You're not gonna, no shortcut, and besides it's fun, man, give me a piece of, I don't even need a piece of paper, a stick in the middle of the sand on a wet beach, fine. Fine.
Right?
Like your mud, yeah. I'm simple. I don't need much.
Well, why don't you give us a quick little sign off? Tell us where we can reach you, how we can reach out to you if we want to get tattooed. Where can we see your artwork? What studio do you work in? Why don't you give us a quick little sign off? But I mean, obviously don't leave just yet.
Okay.
We'll go through and do a quick little, after recap, once this is all done and we stop streaming. So, but yeah, give us a quick little sign off and tell us how we can get a hold of you.
Okay. Terry Ribera there you go. I wore the swag today at Remington Tattoo. Yeah. This is it. This is in San Diego. We're in North Park. So you can really, find my work, just remingtontattoo.com. Obviously I have an Instagram at Terry Ribera. I also have one dedicated to my painting, which is Terry Ribera Paint. I have a website, which is terryriberapaint.com. And I also have the Terry Ribera website.com, which I have not updated in probably 7 years because I really just use our shop website. And our shop Instagram at remingtontattoo.com. And we're both on TikTok, Terry Ribera or Remington on TikTok. Oh man, that's the world we're at.
I know, right? Right.
Wait till you see my dance videos. Amazing.
Well, thank you very much. It's been absolutely enlightening as always talking with you today. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And we will we'll get together and we'll talk about some future projects that maybe we'll get you on, more frequently, and have you share some more knowledge with us.
I'd
I
love
know
that.
we would all absolutely love that as well. So thank you for joining us today. And yeah, we'll be seeing you again in the future, hopefully.
Okay.